John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, covers the Eagles and, of course, the NFL. Read his column at 97.3 ESPN.com. And he joins us now. He's brought to you by Gino Pinto, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Gino Pinto on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton, online at GinoPinto.com. Gino, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. All right, John. Doug back at the podium today. Finally back into somewhat of a routine here. Really, I guess the story going into this week for him is this offense moving forward here, how they're going to implement Jay Ajayi. Are they going to keep relying on the run game? Because as we get into this November, December, they're going to have to continue to run the football here, and obviously that's something they've done very well.
Yeah, real quick before I get to that, I'm disgusted that Joyner got glorious. I didn't know that was up for grabs. That's the greatest entrance ever. But yeah, I mean,
up for grabs.
It's November, and then obviously December's coming. So this is the time of year where running the football becomes more important, especially in the Northeast when you have games here or the Midwest. But and you have the potential for bad weather. So in a lot of ways, I've always questioned why sort of the NFL has devalued the position. And they certainly have from a contract standpoint. But then they still rely on these guys late in the season, and they expect them to perform in the playoffs. So in one way, it's so frustrating for running backs like LeGarrette Blount, who signs, wins the Super Bowl, scores all those touchdowns, and then he's got to sign a one-year deal for basically the veteran minimum, and then they're looking to replace him anyway by bringing in Ajayi. But the good thing for the Eagles is they have options, and if one guy is not hot on a particular day, maybe the other guy will be.
Yeah, and I guess Jay Ajayi is the guy that they're hoping gets hot, and they've been asked a lot about him, about how much too did getting him right before their bye. I mean, the trade deadline is late in the season. But having that bye, a lot of times the guys aren't here for the bye week. But was he around and getting, more comfortable with the offense during the bye week?
Well, we'll kind of find that out tomorrow. I imagine he was. I don't know that. He only speaks on Thursdays. And I tried to talk to him today, and he shut me down. But he does it in his obviously British accent, so it sounds so polite when he does it. But
not today, sir.
He speaks on Thursday, so he'll talk tomorrow. I would imagine he stayed around. You can certainly stay around and work out at the NovaCare facility. A lot of players obviously want to go on vacation, but in his case, where he's traded, he's got to get up to speed in the playbook. I would imagine he was around. Frank Reich talked yesterday about how he would be very comfortable basically putting him in any instance, in any play, in any package. So that's an indication that he's learned the offense. But Doug kind of tempered that a little bit, pumped the brakes at least somewhat, and he said, we'll continue to give him more work, but he wasn't quite at the point where he said he knows the entire offense.
This is a week coming out of the bye that we know the 7-game stretch is for home field. This is what they're playing for now. Not that the division is completely wrapped up, but the focus now has to be getting home field advantage. So what was Doug Peterson's message to his team going into this week? It's something that he discussed today at the press conference, and I thought he gave an interesting answer.
Yeah, I mean, Doug's about winning the day, and he's about, he's a very and he's been consistent with this basically from the beginning of the season. A lot of coaches talk about it, and it's about winning this week. Doug went back to winning today more than anything else, and that means he said there's two kinds of players, there's two kinds of coaches, and that means you're improving, you're getting better, or you're not. And that's what the Eagles sort of have built their foundation upon. It's certainly worked to this point. And he mentioned before the bye, you've started something special, he told the players, but it doesn't mean anything unless you finish it. So he's had really a consistent message, and it's always been about sort of, micromanaging this thing, not looking ahead, And so far, the Eagles have been very successful at it.
Now, last year, they lose that game against Dallas, the fake punt. That's a game that, realistically, they could have won a game against a team that won 13 games last year. They then beat them the last game of the year, but no Tyron Smith, no Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, essentially, they sat a lot of guys out in that game. But what did they take from the games last year that they are implementing this year? I know Jim Schwartz talked about it yesterday because, if they don't have Tyron Smith and Ezekiel Elliott, he said, well, we played them last year and they didn't have those guys because, what would be different about that? But what did they, going back to last year, what did they learn? What did Peterson learn from those specific games?
Well, I think him specifically, I think as a head coach, you learn from every loss and you learn from the mistakes, and that was a game they had in control and kind of let get away from them. So from that standpoint, I think he takes those personal lessons. From the player standpoint, though, they've downplayed it. Carson Wentz downplayed it. The Eagles are a completely different team this time around. That's obvious with the NFL's best record. And the Cowboys are a completely different team. And the fact that, Elliott's not going to be there, Tyron Smith, Jason Garrett wouldn't admit that on his conference call with us today, but he's not going to play. Sean Lee's not going to play. Dan Bailey, even the kicker's out. He's not going to play. I mean, they're wounded, and they haven't been able to handle the injuries as well as the Eagles have. I think people sort of put that crutch and say, well, this is why the Cowboys aren't effective. Hey, man, the Eagles don't have Darren Sproles, Jordan Hicks, Jason Peters. They found a way. And that's the difference between, you mentioned quarterbacks. Speaking of the quarterback issues around the NFL, you mentioned Minnesota. Well, they've lost Teddy Bridgewater a year ago trying to come back. They lost Sam Bradford. They're winning games with Case Keenum. Good teams find a way to win football games.
It's funny you mentioned quarterbacks, John. You talk about Dak Prescott, and a lot of people think that he was kind of exposed last week because when you don't have that safety blanket in Ezekiel Elliott or your left tackle, now it makes you have to make plays, and he just didn't do it against an Atlanta defense that have really struggled this season. Are we starting to see things from Dak Prescott that were kind of hidden because he had those type of safety blankets?
Well, no, I think he's a very good player. I think he's a very good quarterback. I think what you saw last week in Atlanta was a very young quarterback learning a lesson. I think if that continues, then you might put up a red flag and say there's going to be an issue here. Hey, it's easy to play, as the Eagles learned when Jason Peters was healthy and around for so many years. When you don't have to worry about your left tackle, you don't have to scheme, you don't have to help them, you can just game plan and not even think about it. And that's basically the situation the Cowboys were in with Tyron Smith. He's one of the best 2 or 3 left tackles in football. And all of a sudden he's gone. They give up 8 sacks, 6 to Adrian Claiborne, who's a mediocre pass rusher. And people look at the coaching staff and say, they didn't help Chaz Green. They helped. I watched the film. They helped them. They chipped. They called plays. They called design runs. They called short patterns. They tried to help. So some of that is on the quarterback. You have to understand, and this is what the Eagles have talked about consistently, both Peterson and Wentz. You have to understand situational football. And the situation is Tyron Smith isn't playing. And that means if you're the quarterback, you have some responsibility to speed things up, to make sure you get the football out of your hands maybe a little bit more quickly than you usually have to. So I think it's fair to criticize Dak Prescott, but to say he was exposed, hey, if it happens again and again and again, then you could say he's been exposed. If he makes the adjustments and learns from it, I think he'll be fine.
John, you said about the Eagles taking it week by week, day by day. The Eagles, yes, they have a 7-game stretch to where home field could be decided. But you look at this week, don't you want to just take care of the Cowboys on the road, get them out of your hair, and really focus on, okay, even though you won't clinch the division, you pretty much got it intact to beat them this week, and say that, okay, now we can focus on bigger and better things now that we've already gone 4-0 in the division.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Eagles are worried about home field advantage at this point. They understand, and that's what we talked about week by week and micromanaging it. They have to take care of the Cowboys first. That's your first goal, is to win the division, and then you move on. Look, if they lose this game, I talked about it yesterday on the show, the Vikings are playing the Rams. Somebody's got to win that game. So at least one team's going to be 8-2. And if the Eagles lose, they're going to be 8-2. So all of a sudden, you're not necessarily the number one seed. You don't have a clear path. So obviously, you have to keep taking care of business, not only for the division, but also the conference.
When you look at the rest of their schedule and you see that you got the Bears, you got the Rams, you got the Seahawks, how important is just to get these 2 wins against a Cowboys team that's struggling, to beat the Bears at home before you have to gear up for the big boys, so to speak?
It's very important because you have to take advantage of a wounded team who hasn't, as I mentioned, handled their injuries well, or in the case of Elliott, the suspension. The Bears are just a really, really bad football team, and you're playing them at home, so you got to take care of business there. And then you have a very, very difficult road trip, and at least the first 2 legs of it, which is going to be probably the most difficult stretch of this season, for the regular season at least, for the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, the Seahawks, they're not as good as they once were, but everybody in this league will tell you that's one of the most difficult places to play. And the Rams have been the most improved team in football, and the only team that is scoring more points than the Eagles and has a better point differential for the Eagles. So that tells you how dominant they've been.
Hey, John, when you look at this team without Ezekiel Elliott and maybe Smith, what is the focus for the defense? What do they need to stop? What is the one at the top of the list?
It's definitely Dak Prescott. It really is, because he's a dual threat guy. He can beat you throwing the football, and he can beat you extending plays and running the football, both. He can stay in the pocket. He's one of those quarterbacks, much like Carson Wentz. He keeps his eyes downfield. And I wrote about it today on 973ESPN.com. Jim Schwartz said he's the best he's ever seen at that. Now, as I wrote, I think that's a little hyperbole because Jim used to coach in Detroit, so he saw Aaron Rodgers twice a year. And he's not that good, but he is very, very good at extending plays, and it doesn't matter how good you are defensively. If you have a quarterback that can get unscripted offense, and that, in a lot of ways, has made the Eagles so good with Carson, it's difficult to defend over 60 minutes. You might look great for 30 minutes. You might look great for 3 quarters. And all of a sudden, you're going to have a back-breaking play where the quarterback just does something that is almost otherworldly. And Dak has sort of those same skills as Carson Wentz. And he's obviously the most dangerous part of this team with Ezekiel Elliott out, and especially when you think about Des Bryant is not the same player he once was. Cole Beasley's having a down year. And Jason Witten is a Hall of Fame tight end, but he's also a really old guy. So he's not going to stretch the field. Mm-hmm. So there's not a lot of big playability.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Check out his national column, his Eagles Insight, at our website, and follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. Let's look at some of the national stuff, John. Do you have a problem with Buffalo deciding to pull the plug on Tyrod Taylor?
Yeah, I got a big problem. I think it's appalling what they're doing. I think it's evident that they never expected to get off to a 5-2 start. But they did get off to a 5-2 start. And it goes all the way back to the trade of Sammy Watkins, the trade of Darby here. It looked like they were trying to tank and they were adding draft choices. But I think Todd Bowles said it best in the same division. You know, when he's constantly asked about when are you going to go to Christian Hackenberg, and he said this isn't AAA. This isn't, you try to win games. There's 16 of them. And if you don't put the best quarterback you have on the field, you're going to lose that locker room awfully quick, and I think that's what's about to happen in Buffalo.
Yeah, it's a little surprising because McDermott seemingly was pretty popular up there. He got off to a pretty popular start. They seemed like they liked him up there. So it seems that I'm a little surprised he went in there and rocked the boat. I don't know that I'm 100% like against the move. Like if they decide, look, he's just not the guy, they never made the playoffs with him. I don't think he's the reason why they're struggling. Their defense is pretty bad. But I was surprised McDermott, of all guys, made that type of decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Tyrod Taylor is not responsible for the run defense. I mean, the first time the Saints have ever been known for running the football was against the Buffalo Bills, and you seem to be benching Tyrod Taylor over that. And then, by the way, you can't stop the run, and maybe because you traded Marcel Darius, he's another guy they got rid of. And there's some off-the-field issues with him as well. So from that standpoint, okay. But from the larger picture, you're right. They don't think Taylor is the future. So from that perspective, you can understand it. But they also know Nathan Peterman isn't the future either. And they got a ton of draft choices, and they have the capital to move up and down if they do like a quarterback. So to me, taking an NBA tanking approach is not the way to go in Buffalo because they have too many good players. So, A, you're not going to lose enough games anyway, probably, to get at the top of the draft. And, B, you've already collected the draft choices to move up or down if you like a player already. So why disrupt the locker room and why upset the players who are trying to win football games?
John, I tweeted it this morning that I hope whatever quarterback in the draft they like works out for them, because this is just mind-boggling to me that, okay, listen, Tyrod Taylor may not be the answer long-term, but right now, if the playoffs started today, you'd be in the playoffs, and you just don't want to give the division to New England, even though they're not going to win the division anyway. I mean, what are you selling your fan base on right now that you took out a quarterback who wasn't really playing that bad? I mean, he has, 10 touchdown passes, only 3 interceptions?
No, he's played – by every measurable, he's been a top 15 quarterback this year in this league. And he's not great, as I said, and they don't believe he's the long-term answer. And I don't necessarily disagree with them. And as far as winning the division, they don't have to give it to New England because New England's going to take it. I know all this. But you're a team that hasn't made the postseason since 1999. The Cleveland Browns have made the postseason since you've last made the postseason. It's bad. And to give your fan base, to give your locker room at least some hope, and as you mentioned, they're still in the playoff race, you don't bench your best quarterback.
The Vikings are going to stick with Case Keenum over Bridgewater. Is it a matter of time, in your opinion? Are they waiting for Keenum to slip up because they can't justify it? What do they want to do out there, John?
Well, they're like everybody else. No one believes Case Keenum can play at this level. I think the Vikings are like everybody else. The only one who thinks Case Keenum can keep this up is Case Keenum. And from his perspective, I mean, that's the way you have to approach it. If he keeps winning football games, he's going to be the starting quarterback. But I think everybody is waiting for the other shoe to drop. They see what he did in Houston. They see what he did with the Rams. And they assume he can't play at this level. But you can't bench him now. You just can't.
Do they want to?
It's absurd.
Do they want to?
I think they have a higher ceiling. They think they have a higher ceiling with Bridgewater. So from their perspective, I don't know if you would say they want to. It's just that they believe that he's a better quarterback. But that's a healthy Teddy Bridgewater. That's the Teddy Bridgewater before he went down in August of last season, which is now 15, 16 months. from the last time he's played in an NFL football game, and that was a preseason game.
But John, don't you have to figure out what you have in him though? Isn't he a free agent after this year? I mean, you have to make.
You don't have to figure it out when you're 7-2, and you're the second seed in the conference, and you might have the best defense in the conference. You try to win. One of the major reasons Minnesota traded for Sam Bradford is because they thought they had a Super Bowl level roster, and they didn't want to waste a season. And it didn't turn out to work, although Sam deserves credit because I think he played pretty well. But the offensive line just got really banged up and got a ton of injuries. Well, they fixed the offensive line through free agency and the draft. They have one of the better offensive lines in the NFC. On top of that, still top 5 defense. So you have to try to win football games. And it's like what Doug Peterson, we just said. You got to worry about next week. You don't worry about next year. Nobody's going to swoop in and steal Teddy Bridgewater from you. He's coming off a catastrophic leg injury. No one's giving him $20 million. He will re-sign with the Vikings. So you don't have to worry about that.
John McMullen, more at 973ESPN.com. On the Eagles, the NFL. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. And every day right here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Maybe we'll do Glorious for you tomorrow.
Thanks, John.
I would appreciate it. I should have gotten the memo before joining.
Well, Ric Flair is still available. Macho Man, Randy Savage.
You can always go with the Shield theme, John.
Yeah, I'm a big Ric Flair guy. But
yeah.
It's
funny that you say this because I'm about to I was writing some new imaging for this segment, so we can have a brand new open and brand new music you can pick.
Yeah, but I love it. I think Rude has the greatest entrance in the history of wrestling.
Wow. In the history.
Whoa.
In the history.
Glorious.
It's funny you say that because just got a tweet.
Before they scaled it back. Yeah.
We just got a tweet saying, can't believe John McMullen said Bobby Roode Glorious is the best wrestling song ever. Austin Flair, way better.
Now, the entrance as a whole is off the charts. And again, you have to go back to when he was in NXT. They scaled it back since he got up to SmackDown. The original NXT entrance, which by the way, took about 8 minutes. It was absurd how long it took. It was just off the charts.
All right. Well, you tell me which song is apropos for we got new imaging coming.
I think Glorious is obviously this is the Glorious segment.
Possible. It's possible. I'll see if Joyner will make a trade.
Thanks, Ed.